I remember the first time I realized the silence in our home wasn't a comforting calm, but the echo of something breaking. The nursery had been my refuge. Pale lavender walls, the soft hum of the mobile spinning above the crib. But that night, the quiet felt heavy, charged with a tension I couldn't place. I was alone on the creaking hallway floor, wallet in my trembling hand, reading the bank statement. He'd drained our joint account. My heart stuttered. We met on a humid July evening in New Orleans. I was chasing a story on a headline-grabbing philanthropist. He was the investigative photographer who captured my attention with a wry smile and a lens that saw right through me. It felt cinematic at first. Two journalists thrown together by fate. We laughed under fairy lights. By fall, I was telling him about the life I dreamed of. A warm home in Austin, 2 kids, a dog named Winston. He whispered, "I can give you that." I believed him. Pregnancy came quietly after our second anniversary. I stood on the dusty street outside my favorite taco truck, a folded test in my hand, the world dissolving into vibrant color. His arms were steady around me as I read the faint plus sign. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he said, pressing his lips to my forehead. I closed my eyes and wished I could freeze that moment forever. But you can't. Life doesn't pause. I snuck into the nursery before dawn each morning, brushing paintbrushes over the wall edges, imagining the laughter that would fill this room. In the evenings, we pulled up blueprints of the house he claimed we'd build, hand-drawn sketches he'd scattered with notes like, "High windows for morning light," and "Rainfall shower here." Our future felt as solid as oak, but fear began creeping in like a pale fog. I'd catch him staring at his phone with a clenched jaw, or hear hushed voices through the walls when I thought he was out photographing a story. I blamed it on stress, on deadlines, and my sudden craving for pickles at 3 a.m. When I asked, he'd kiss my forehead and murmur, "Don't worry, babe, it's nothing." And I believed him again, because I was in love, and because I wanted to. On a Tuesday afternoon, he disappeared. His truck was gone, parked nowhere near the driveway for the first time. My calls went straight to voicemail. He left behind a note on the kitchen table, a single line in his looping script. "I need space. I'll call." No explanation. No apology. I stared at that white slip of paper as if it held a secret code I couldn't crack. I called his phone until the battery died. I went to his favorite diner, the photography studio on South Congress, the taco truck stand downtown. Nothing. Each dead end felt like a blade twisting in my chest. The walls of our home, once safe, began closing in. Shadows in the corners seemed to mock my panic. Nights were the worst. I lay in bed, listening for the familiar creak of the front door, the weight of his footsteps. Silence answered. Then the truth arrived in text messages from a number I didn't recognize. Pictures of him and another woman, cocktails in hand at a Vegas resort, his arm wrapped around her waist. Their laughter frozen in pixelated color. My breath caught. I felt suddenly weightless, like the ground had dissolved beneath me. Each photo was a knife, neon signs, glittering casinos, and the tongue of Vegas heat against their sunlit skin. I called him until I could call no more. At 2 a.m., I pounded on his studio door in a rainstorm, soaked and shaking. No answer. The lights were off. My own sobs drenched the sidewalk. A siren wailed in the distance. The world spun. I realized then that anger was rising alongside my grief, an ember igniting behind my ribs. I would not be the victim in my own story. I sat at my desk at dawn, hands blistered from dialing lawyers. The nursery door cracked open behind me. I'd signed the divorce papers that morning, before he even hit send on his goodbyes. Filing that paperwork felt like planting a flag, a declaration that I would survive this, with or without him. The clerk had asked, "Are you sure?" I'd nodded, voice steady. Leaving the courthouse, the sky was a brilliant blue, mocking in its serenity. I thought of the lavender walls, the sketches of our dream house, the nursery waiting for a child who would arrive with only one parent present. My chest felt empty, yet my resolve burned fierce. I would build a life for my child, no matter the cost. I packed 2 suitcases, maternity clothes, the ultrasound photos, the portable crib folded flat. I wiped tears from my cheeks, but I did not break. With each item I slid into the bag, I whispered promises. Safety, love, stability. What he took from me, I would reclaim one day. This was not the end. It was the first step toward becoming the mother and the woman I was destined to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. I drove with white knuckles, the steering wheel slick beneath my grip. Texas heat shimmered off the road in waves, but inside my little sedan, it felt like ice. The kind of cold that sits in your bones even when the sun is blistering. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, not once. I told myself I was only moving forward now. I had no family in the traditional sense. My mother passed when I was 23. My father, well, let's just say he disappeared long before I understood abandonment. There was no warm porch light waiting, no spare bedroom in a parent's home. There was only me, my baby, and the handful of dollars left after I split our account into legal halves. And yet, I didn't feel small. I felt carved out and sharpened. The town I chose was nestled between Austin and San Antonio, just a dot on the map, the kind of place with feed stores and Baptist churches every few miles. I found an old duplex owned by a widow named Marlene, who took one look at my belly and offered me the place for half her asking price. "God's watching, honey," she said, eyes soft as she handed me the keys. The walls were thin, the floors creaky, but it was mine. I unpacked alone. I built the crib alone. I scrubbed old kitchen cabinets until my fingers ached. With every wipe, I was scrubbing his presence from my life. Scrubbing the betrayal, the lies, the wasted dreams. I didn't hang our old wedding photos. I didn't even bring them. I let the lavender paint swatches sit folded in the bottom of a drawer. A new nursery would come, and it would be different. Every morning, I walked to the library. They had air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and the quiet I needed to think. I looked up everything from single mother grants to prenatal yoga videos. I devoured parenting blogs, financial advice columns, and read every book on resilience I could get my hands on. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to grow stronger. A week after moving in, I got a job offer. A small local paper needed someone to cover community events. Far from the high-stakes journalism I once chased, but it was a start. I said yes immediately. The editor, Ruth, was in her 50s with steel gray curls and the kind of voice that made you straighten your spine. She didn't ask about my past. She handed me a press badge and said, "We've got a chili cook-off Saturday. Don't be late." Quote. That night, I cried into my pillow, not from sadness, but from sheer exhaustion and a sense of pride that burned in my throat. I was showing up. Every day, I was choosing to show up. But peace never lasted. Not with him. 2 weeks later, his name popped up on my phone screen, Ryder calling. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear his voice, not after everything. He texted 3 hours later. "I'm sorry. I messed up. Please call me." Sorry. 2 syllables, a canyon of damage behind them. I didn't reply. The next day, a delivery truck pulled into my gravel driveway. The man handed me a box. No return address. Inside, I found baby clothes. Designer. Tag still on. There was no note. Just a receipt, showing the order came from a boutique in Las Vegas. Rage coiled in my gut. He thought he could buy his way back in? As if a box of overpriced onesies erased the weeks of silence, the images of him with her, the hospital appointments I went to alone. I donated the clothes to a shelter the next morning. Then the letters started. Handwritten. One arrived every 3 days. Long, rambling apologies. Descriptions of how lost he'd felt. How the woman in Vegas meant nothing. How he was scared of becoming a father. How he missed me. How he missed our dream. He used words like broken and forgiveness, words I used to cherish. But now they felt like rusty nails trying to hold together a house that had already collapsed. Still, his presence hovered like a ghost. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and swear I heard his voice in the hallway. I kept the nursery door closed now. It wasn't ready, not just because it lacked a crib or mobile, but because the wound was still open. Healing was a process, and I was still in the middle of it. At the doctor's appointment that week, the nurse smiled as she spread gel over my belly. The screen lit up with life, a little fluttering heartbeat. My heart clenched. This was my reason now, my fuel. I left the clinic holding a printed ultrasound, and this time, I didn't feel hollow, I felt whole. Then he showed up. Not as a name on my screen, not as a letter, but in person. I came home to find him sitting on the porch steps. He looked thinner, older, like the Vegas lights had dimmed his soul. "Don't," I said, not even taking a step closer. "Don't say a word." He stood slowly. "Please, just 5 minutes." 5 minutes for 5 weeks of hell? I kept my voice steady, even as my hands shook. "You think you deserve that?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a necklace. Not the engagement ring, not a token of our past. Just a simple gold chain with a tiny charm shaped like a star. "I saw it and thought of you," he said. "You always followed your own north." I laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "You saw it while with her?" He flinched. "That's over, I swear, it didn't mean anything." "Everything means something," I said. "Every choice has weight. You left me pregnant and vanished into neon lies." He tried to step closer. "I want to fix this." "There is no this to fix." I backed away, hand on my stomach. "I'm not your redemption story." He looked like a man realizing too late he'd bet it all and lost. "Please, just let me." "No," I said. "Go." And he did, down the gravel path. No fight, no grand speeches, just silence. I didn't cry, not that night. Instead, I cleaned out the nursery. I painted the walls a pale yellow. I assembled the crib again. I hung a string of lights shaped like stars across the window. I filled the room with music. I filled it with hope. I even found a second-hand glider chair and sat in it every night, whispering stories to the life inside me. Promises. Truths. That we would be okay. That I would never vanish. I filed the restraining order the following week. I didn't know if he'd come back again. But I wasn't taking chances. I was done playing defense. Then, a month later, an envelope arrived, legal-sized. My name printed on it in bold font. It was from his lawyer. He was suing for custody. The world tilted again. And this time, I would not be the one running. The words on the page blurred. For a second, I thought I might black out. Custody. Not visitation, not mediation, full-blown custody. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table so tightly the wood groaned beneath my fingers. My eyes darted across the document again, searching for an explanation, a reason, anything that made sense. But there it was. His signature, dated and sealed, requesting primary custody of a child not yet born. The audacity was so stunning I laughed. It wasn't joy. It was disbelief. The kind that comes when reality warps and you realize the villain in your story doesn't even know he's the villain. I called my lawyer. Her name was Deirdre, a quiet but razor-sharp advocate from a nearby firm. She picked up on the first ring. "He's suing for custody," I said, the words tasting like rust. Silence on the line, then a slow inhale. "Send me the papers. Now." Within hours, Deirdre had filed an emergency motion to respond. She told me not to worry, but I could hear the edge in her voice. "He's making a move, which means we make one too." I wanted to scream, to drive to his apartment and throw every one of his letters through his windows. But I didn't. I had a baby to protect, and fury couldn't be the one raising my blood pressure. Instead, I spent the night sorting through documents, photos, messages, receipts, anything that painted the full picture of his disappearance. I made folders, printed screenshots, annotated timelines. I was going to war with facts, not emotion. The next week felt like a blur. I worked during the day, covering dog shows, summer festivals, and town hall meetings. Then I'd come home and build my case. Nights were long, swollen with anxiety. Every knock at the door startled me. Every shadow looked like him. When the court date was set, I stared at the calendar and marked it with a red pen. August 14th. I would be 8 months pregnant. Ruth, my editor, found me dozing at my desk one afternoon, fingers still hovering over the keyboard. "You look like a ghost someone forgot to haunt," she said gently. I tried to smile, but my lips barely moved. "Come on," she said. "Lunch is on me." We sat in the back of a quiet cafe, the kind with faded tablecloths and a jukebox that only played 70s hits. She didn't ask questions until we'd finished our meal. Then she pushed aside her plate and folded her arms. "I've been through a divorce," she said. "Messy, ugly, ended in court. But there's one thing I wish someone had told me sooner." "What?" "That it's okay to be the villain in his version of the story, as long as you're the hero in yours." I blinked. "You don't need to be perfect, you need to be brave." Her words struck something in me, a truth I hadn't let myself say out loud. I didn't need him to like me. I didn't need anyone's approval. I needed to protect my child. That was the only north I needed. A week before the hearing, his lawyer sent a proposed visitation agreement. 2 weekends a month, alternating holidays, access to the child immediately after birth. Deirdre snorted. "Absolutely not. You're not a vending machine. He doesn't get to show up after disappearing and cash in a fatherhood token." I nodded, but a lump caught in my throat. Somewhere deep inside, I had hoped he'd just vanish again. That he'd disappear like a bad dream and leave me to heal. Instead, he was trying to write himself into a role he hadn't earned. The night before the hearing, I sat in the nursery. The lights were dim. The crib was assembled, lined with soft sheets. A stuffed owl sat in the corner, waiting. I rested a hand on my belly and whispered to my daughter, because I knew somehow that's who she was. "I'm going to protect you, no matter what." Court was sterile and unforgiving. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and cold coffee. Ryder sat across from me, wearing a button-down shirt he never used to iron, next to a lawyer with perfect teeth and a smirk I wanted to slap off his face. He didn't look at me. Not once. Deirdre stood tall, calm, precise. She laid out everything. The abandonment. The weeks of no contact. The sudden attempt to re-enter our lives with luxury gifts and legal threats. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I took the stand, palms sweating. I told the truth. No embellishments, no performance, just the facts. The nights I slept alone. The doctor's appointments. The job I took. The home I made. His lawyer tried to twist it. Suggested I was trying to keep him away out of spite. I leaned forward. "I'm keeping him away because he walked away." There was no goodbye. No explanation, just silence. And I will not let my child grow up thinking that kind of abandonment is love. The judge took it all in, face unreadable. When it was Ryder's turn to speak, he fumbled. Talked about regret. Talked about panic. He looked small. Not the man I married. Just a boy wearing grown-up clothes and consequences. The judge didn't make a decision that day. "I'll review everything and make a ruling within a week." The wait was torture. Every day, I checked the mail like it held a bomb. When the letter arrived, I sat on my porch steps and opened it slowly. Primary custody granted to the mother. Visitation delayed pending psychological review and proof of sustained stability. My breath left in a gasp. Relief, fierce and wild, bloomed in my chest. I clutched the paper to my chest and cried. Not because I was scared, but because I had fought, and I had won. That night, I allowed myself one indulgence. I made brownies from scratch, I lit candles, I played music. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Me. Strong, clear-eyed, whole. But life has a way of never letting the dust settle. 3 days later, a reporter showed up at my door. She had a notepad, a recorder, and eyes that glittered with hunger. "I'm doing a piece on courtroom custody battles," she said. "Your ex-husband leaked some claims to the press. Would you like to comment?" My stomach turned to stone. The war wasn't over. It was just changing shape. The reporter's name was Kayla Price. Her hair was in a glossy ponytail, and her voice was too rehearsed to be casual. She stood on my front porch in a crisp blouse and slacks, holding out a laminated press badge like it meant something to me. "He says you locked him out of your daughter's life," she said without hesitation. I blinked, stunned. "She's not even born yet." "He says you've denied him access. that you filed the restraining order out of revenge, not necessity." The words stung like fresh salt in wounds I was still trying to close. I could feel my heart rate rising, the blood rushing to my ears. "He says a lot of things," I managed, voice low, "none of which change what he did." She tapped her recorder. "Off the record. For now. He's trying to clear his name. If you want to present your side before this story runs, now's the time." I took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. "No comment. Please leave." She didn't argue. She gave me a nod that pretended to be respectful and turned back down the steps. But I knew that nod. It wasn't courtesy. It was a warning. A storm was brewing, and she was ready to print every single drop of poison he fed her. I closed the door and locked it. For the next 3 days, I waited. Nothing came. Then, just as I was beginning to hope it might blow over, my phone buzzed with a notification. "Breaking local. A father's fight. Man says ex abandoned him during her pregnancy." My hands shook as I clicked the article. The headline alone was enough to make my blood boil. The story was full of half-truths and twisted timelines. Ryder painted himself as a confused, remorseful father, desperate to be part of his daughter's life. He admitted his quote, indiscretion, but claimed he returned with the intention to rebuild the relationship. According to him, I had slammed every door in his face. There was no mention of the weeks he was gone, no word about the photos from Vegas, the months of silence, or the custody suit he launched without so much as a phone call. And then there was a quote from his lawyer. "It's unfortunate when one parent weaponizes legal tools to alienate the other. We hope the court sees through this." I nearly dropped the phone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch holes in walls. But I couldn't afford chaos. Not now. I was 9 months pregnant. My body was aching, my ankles swollen, and my blood pressure already higher than my doctor liked. I turned off my phone. The next morning, there were 3 voicemails waiting for me. My boss, my landlord, a friend from the paper who had never even met Ryder. All of them had seen the article. All of them were worried. Ruth's voice was the only one that didn't carry panic. "Don't let this rattle you," she said in her message. "The world's full of people who can twist anything. Stay focused. You're almost there." I sat down at my desk, placed both hands on my belly, and reminded myself, this wasn't about revenge. It was about protection, safety, truth, and no news article could rewrite what I knew. Still, the fallout came quickly. Marlene, my landlady, came by with a pie and a newspaper. She didn't say anything, just handed them to me with eyes full of pity. I hated that look more than anything. 2 moms from the prenatal group I just started attending didn't show up to the next meeting. One texted later saying she felt caught in the middle. I deleted the message without replying. The town was small, the story was loud. Ryder's name was suddenly everywhere. He was giving interviews, posting pictures of baby gifts he'd bought, tagging mutual friends in posts about starting over and learning to be better. He was building a narrative, one where I was the bitter ex and he was the misunderstood hero. And I was too pregnant to chase it all down. I spent my days in silence. The nursery became both haven and prison. I nested obsessively, folding baby clothes, organizing drawers, sanitizing bottles. Anything to stay busy. Anything to stay sane. Then, one night, the contractions started. They were mild at first, rhythmic. I timed them on an app and watched them dance across the screen. My hospital bag had been packed for weeks. The car seat was installed. I had a plan. I just didn't know it would start at 3:27 a.m. during a thunderstorm. The drive to the hospital was surreal. I'd never driven through that kind of pain before. But I wasn't calling anyone for help. I wasn't calling him. I wasn't calling anyone but the nurse at the intake desk. Labor was long. 23 hours. The nurses were kind. One of them, a redhead named Julie, held my hand through the worst of it. She didn't ask questions. She just stayed. When the moment came, it felt like the world stopped. Then it rushed forward again, all at once, as my daughter entered it with a cry that shattered every wall inside me. I named her Madeline, Maddie for short. 8 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect in every way. The next 48 hours blurred. Feedings, diaper changes, nurses checking vitals. Visitors came, Ruth, Marlene, even one of the moms from the group who'd ghosted me. She brought flowers and apologized. I accepted. I didn't have the energy for grudges. Then came the inevitable. Ryder. He appeared in the hallway, bouquet in hand, 2 days after I gave birth. I was holding Maddie when I saw him through the glass. I pressed the call button. Please don't let him in, I told the nurse. There's a restraining order. Within minutes, security escorted him out. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. But he did leave the flowers. I threw them away. 3 days after coming home, I received an envelope. Another legal document. He was filing for emergency access. I stared at the words. My body was still healing, stitched and sore. My daughter was barely a week old, and he was trying to claw his way in again. I called Deirdre. What can we do? We can fight, she said, and we will, but he's playing public opinion. We need to get ahead of this. I swallowed. You mean speak out? Yes, on your terms. For the first time, I considered it. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I cared what strangers thought, but because I needed to protect the truth. For Maddie. For me. So I drafted a letter. It was not angry, it was not bitter, it was a story. My story. I wrote about abandonment, about love turned to grief, about strength found in silence, about the lies he fed the media, and about the daughter I held through all of it. I sent it to Ruth. If you think it's right, publish it. The article went live the next day. One mother's side, the truth behind the headlines. It exploded. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was raw, honest, human. The comments flooded in. Messages from strangers, single moms, survivors. Even former friends of Ryder's who said they were sorry for ever believing him. The tide shifted. And for the first time in weeks, I exhaled. But even as my inbox filled with kindness, a new notification popped up. Deirdre, he's not done. He's appealing the custody ruling. The battlefield just moved to higher ground. Deirdre's email sat at the top of my inbox like a landmine. Short subject line, no punctuation, just, he's appealing. I read the words again and again, hoping I'd misread them. But no, it was there in black and white. Ryder was appealing the custody ruling. The same man who vanished when I needed him most, who only reappeared with photographers and microphones, was now clawing for more. Again. I was holding Maddie when I read it. Her fingers were curled into a fist around the neckline of my shirt, her breath small and soft against my skin. My body still hadn't fully healed. I couldn't stand too long without aching, but I was supposed to gear up for another legal fight? I pressed my lips to the top of her fuzzy head and whispered, I've got you. He's not going to take you, I swear. Deirdre called within the hour. She didn't waste time on small talk. We'll file a response, she said, but I want to warn you, this won't be like last time. He's hired new representation. Out-of-town firm. Expensive. How expensive? They don't take clients unless there's a retainer in the 5-figure range. My stomach dropped. Where did he get that kind of money? Could be from her, she replied. That Vegas woman. They're still together, as far as my PI says. So that was it. The same woman he left me for was now funding his next attack. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I sat in the glider next to the crib and rocked Maddie, one hand tracing the curve of her back. That night, after she finally drifted off, I pulled up my laptop and opened a spreadsheet I hadn't touched since pregnancy. My finances. The sum total of everything I had left. Between my job, a modest inheritance from my mother, and what was left after the split, it wasn't much. I called Ruth the next morning. Can we talk? We met at the same cafe, that little one with the jukebox and burnt coffee. She listened as I explained everything. The appeal, the costs, the weight of it all. I wasn't asking for money. I just needed to say it out loud. When I finished, she reached into her purse, pulled out a folded envelope, and slid it across the table. I've been holding this, she said. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you, but I think now's the time. Inside was a check. From the newspaper, a bonus, and a letter of recommendation addressed to an editor at a national parenting magazine. I pitched your story, she said quietly. The personal one, the op-ed. They loved it. They want to run a longer version, with your name on it. they'll pay you. I stared at the check, my throat tightened. Ruth, I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep fighting. Say you'll write it all down. I did. The days that followed blurred into a cycle of diapers, deadlines, and depositions. Ryder's new legal team was aggressive. They subpoenaed my medical records, dug into my social media, even tried to claim that my letter to the public was a quote, campaign of alienation. I refused to back down. When the parenting magazine published my piece, it went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was honest. I didn't paint myself as perfect. I just told the truth. Hundreds of women reached out, emails, comments, handwritten letters, stories like mine, worse than mine, all of them ending with the same phrase. I see you. It gave me strength. But the threats came too. Anonymous accounts, trolls calling me bitter, hateful messages accusing me of lying, men demanding I let the father have a chance. I forwarded them all to Deirdre. She documented everything. 2 weeks before the appeal hearing, I was served with a new motion. Ryder wanted not just visitation but partial custody. Shared legal rights, Deirdre said grimly. It's a power play. He doesn't actually want to co-parent. He wants control. I couldn't sleep that night. Maddie woke twice. Each time, I held her longer than necessary, watching her chest rise and fall. She was too young to understand the war being waged around her. But one day she would. And when that day came, I wanted to be able to look her in the eye and say I did everything I could. The day of the hearing, the courthouse felt colder than before, larger, as if the walls had stretched with the weight of what was about to unfold. Ryder walked in with a suit and a smirk. She was there too. Vegas Barbie, as Deirdre called her. Perfect makeup. Diamond bracelets. I wondered if she knew the full story. If she knew the man beside her had left me in a thunderstorm with a baby kicking in my ribs. Maybe she didn't care. The judge was different this time. A woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. Ryder's attorney came out swinging, painting me as uncooperative, vindictive, emotionally unstable. He referenced my article as proof I was trying to turn the world against Ryder. Deirdre stood and calmly dismantled every point. She is not unstable, she said. She is a mother who was abandoned and then forced to defend herself in the public square. I took the stand. Again. This time Maddie was in the hallway with Ruth. I didn't want her in the room for this. I am not keeping him away because I'm angry, I said. I'm keeping him away because he made himself a stranger. And you don't give strangers access to your child. Ryder's team argued that he had a right to redemption, that a child needs both parents, that forgiveness is part of maturity. But when Ryder himself spoke, he made a mistake. I've changed, he said. I've learned from Vegas, from the articles, from the backlash. I'm a better man now. He didn't mention Maddie until the end. Not her name, not her face, just his own growth, his own need for closure. The judge noticed. I could see it in the tightening of her jaw. She called for a recess. We waited. And waited. 2 hours later, we were called back in. Her voice was steady as she read the ruling. Appeal denied. Full custody remained with me. No visitation until psychological evaluations were complete, and at the court's discretion thereafter. Ryder's jaw clenched. He didn't stand, didn't speak, just stared at the table like he could will it to collapse. I exhaled. My knees buckled. Ruth caught me in the hallway, wrapping her arms around me as Maddie let out a soft coo from her carrier. You did it, she whispered. I smiled through tears. We did. But as we left the courthouse, a man in a gray suit approached. He handed me a business card. Ms. Hargrave? My name is Julian Ford. I'm an attorney, and I think you might have a defamation case on your hands. I blinked. Against who? He smiled. The reporter. And your ex. The war, it seemed, wasn't over. But maybe now, it was my turn to go on the offense. Julian Ford was not what I expected. He didn't swagger. He didn't posture. He spoke softly and listened harder, with that rare ability to let a silence settle long enough for the truth to surface. He came to my duplex the next day with a worn leather briefcase and eyes that looked like they'd seen too many people hurt in the same ways. I don't take every case, he said, unfolding a stack of papers with calm precision. But yours isn't just defensible, it's righteous. I sat across from him, Maddie asleep in her carrier by the table, the hum of her sound machine faint in the background. My coffee was cold, my chest still tight from weeks of battle. Defamation? I asked. Don't you have to prove malice? You do, he said, but you've got proof. The article misrepresented court facts. It falsely implied you were trying to withhold your daughter as punishment. And you have receipts, records, testimonies. His lawyer fed Kayla Price a narrative, and she printed it without verifying. That's more than sloppy. It's actionable. I stared at him. What happens if we win? You set the record straight. And maybe, you remind people that truth still matters. He left me with a folder and his business card. Said to call when I was ready. I didn't call that day, or the next. I waited, sat with it. Because even though I was furious, burning with it, I was also tired. Court had drained me. Maddie needed everything, and I didn't want her early life to be shadowed by lawsuits and revenge. But truth isn't revenge. And silence doesn't protect you from lies. The article still circulated, still got reposted. People who didn't know me, didn't know anything, were still debating my choices online like they were public domain. So I called Julian. Let's do it, I said. Let's make it right. The process moved slowly at first. Julian filed the initial complaint against Kayla Price and her media outlet. He sent Ryder a separate notice of civil intent, informing him that his recorded statements to the press and his documented efforts to manipulate public opinion through known falsehoods were going to be brought into light. The moment it went public, the noise exploded again. But this time, it wasn't just noise. It was fuel. The parenting magazine that had published my op-ed ran a follow-up. Mother smeared, then vindicated. The fight for truth in family court. More mothers reached out. So did attorneys, journalists, advocacy groups. A nationally syndicated show asked me to speak. I said no, then yes, then no again, then yes, but only live. Because if they were going to twist my words again, they'd have to do it in real time. Ruth flew with me to New York. Maddie came, bundled in her little carrier, sleeping between flights like the world didn't weigh anything. The segment ran on a Tuesday morning. The studio was cold, the lights blinding. But the host was kind. She asked careful questions. I told the truth. I didn't cry. When I returned home, the voicemail box was full again. This time, most were supportive. A few were nasty. One was from Kayla Price herself. I didn't know, she said. I trusted the source. I was wrong. I'm sorry. She asked if we could meet. Julian advised against it. Let her statement stand. Don't give her a second bite at your story. So I declined. But I saved the message. Just in case. Ryder, meanwhile, went quiet. No more posts. No interviews. His social media was scrubbed of anything related to the custody case. He and Vegas Barbie went radio silent. Until the subpoena. Julian served them both. I imagined the look on her face when the papers arrived. I imagined the fear in his chest. But I didn't savor it. I didn't have time. Because Maddie was crawling now, laughing, growing, and I wasn't going to miss any of it. The court date for the defamation hearing landed 6 months after Maddie's birth. By then, I was back at work full-time. Ruth had promoted me to a column position, Voices from Home. I wrote about motherhood, survival, dignity, and resilience. Sometimes it was essays, sometimes interviews, always real. And the world noticed. One article went viral, the lie I refused to let win. By the time we arrived in court, the courtroom wasn't just full, it was packed. Journalists, bloggers, podcasters, people who cared, people who wanted blood, people who didn't know the difference. Julian didn't flinch. He presented the facts, timelines, emails, statements, court documents. He played recordings of Ryder contradicting himself. He showed how Kayla had published false information without verification. He made it simple. They tried to ruin her, for clicks, for control, for ego, but she refused to break, and that refusal is not a crime, it is courage. Kayla's lawyers settled mid-trial. She issued a public apology, a real one, not PR. She said she'd failed her readers. that she let her ambition cloud her judgment. She donated her settlement amount to a women's shelter in Austin and resigned from her publication. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. But Ryder? He dug in. He refused to settle, claimed the lawsuit was vindictive, said I was exploiting the court system for clout. So we pushed forward. And then, during discovery, we found the messages. He'd coordinated the entire narrative, paid a former friend to pose as a source, bribed a clerk at a local print shop to leak sealed documents, lied under oath about when he saw Maddie for the first time. Julian brought it all into court. The judge reviewed the evidence in silence. Then she looked up and said, "Mr. Hargrave, you have not only lied, you have weaponized the truth against the very people you claim to love. This court finds your actions reprehensible." She awarded damages in full. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the record. The public one. The one they couldn't twist. After the verdict, I walked out of the courthouse, holding Maddie in one arm and the judgment in the other. Reporters called after me. Cameras flashed. I didn't stop. I put Maddie in the car seat, climbed in beside her, and drove. Home. Back to the quiet, the glider chair, the nursery lined with stars. I held her that night and whispered, "It's over, really over." She smiled in her sleep, but part of me knew it would never truly be over. Not in the world, not in the headlines, not in the systems built to doubt women who survive. But I had carved something permanent from the wreckage, a voice, a platform, a truth that could not be taken. And tomorrow, I would tell the next story. The next morning, sunlight poured into the nursery like a blessing. Maddie's coos were soft and rhythmic as I changed her diaper, humming the same tune I'd made up during my third trimester, a lullaby born out of insomnia and hope. Her hands grasped at nothing and everything at once, eyes wide and curious. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. Like I had finally stepped out of the tornado that had spun my world sideways since that first note he left on the kitchen table. I need space. I fed her oatmeal in her little booster chair, now speckled with applesauce stains I'd given up trying to scrub out. The news played in the background on low volume, though I wasn't really listening until I heard his name. Ryder Hargrave, central figure in a widely publicized custody battle and defamation suit, issued a statement this morning following last week's court ruling. I turned up the volume. There he was on screen. The lighting was bad and he looked gaunt. No suit, no girlfriend hovering nearby, just him and a camera phone. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I let fear ruin the best thing I had. And while the courts have spoken, I want to say this to my daughter someday. I'm sorry. I never meant to be the villain. I just didn't know how to be a father yet." It was subdued, no media circus, no dramatic soundbites, almost human. I turned it off before it could register too deeply. Letting it settle meant opening a door I had fought too hard to keep shut. Still, it lingered. Not guilt, not forgiveness. Grief. Grief, for the version of him I once believed in, for the family we were supposed to be, for all the mornings I'd imagined waking up to a co-parent instead of empty sheets and unread texts. But I'd learned not to feed grief too long. It grows when fed. So I closed my laptop, strapped Maddie into her stroller, and walked. The air was brisk. Early spring had arrived, sneaking warmth into Texas mornings. Tulips bloomed along the edges of Main Street. I passed the bakery, the library, the little bookstore, where I used to read parenting guides while Maddie kicked inside me. People recognized me more now. Some nodded in solidarity. Others whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. A few stopped me. "You're brave," a young woman said once outside the post office. "My sister's going through something similar. I shared your article with her." I always thanked them, even when my mouth was dry with discomfort. Being a symbol was never my goal, but I couldn't deny the power of visibility. And maybe, if Maddie ever faced something like this, I'd want someone's story to remind her she wasn't alone. That afternoon, Ruth called. "I've got a new opportunity for you," she said, her voice buzzing with quiet excitement. "A book deal." I blinked. "What?" A publishing house reached out. They read your columns. They want a memoir. From the start to now, all of it. I felt my chest tighten. That's a lot. They don't want perfect, Ruth said. They want real. I stared at the half-eaten peanut butter sandwich on Maddie's high-chair tray, at the crumbs caught in her bib, at the toothless grin she flashed between bites. Real. I could do real. I signed the deal a week later. The advance wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to open a savings account in Maddie's name, enough to fix the fence in the backyard, enough to exhale again. Writing the book was harder than I expected. It meant revisiting everything. The Vegas photos, the silence, the hospital, the courtroom. I wrote during naps. At midnight. On weekends when Ruth sent me out to a borrowed cabin in Wimberley and said, "Don't come back till you've written 3 chapters." I cried into the keyboard more than once. I laughed too. At memories of Maddie kicking during a courtroom recess, at the way Marlene made me blueberry cobbler after every hearing, at the look on Ryder's face when the judge read her verdict. The manuscript took 6 months. When I sent it to the publisher, my hands trembled. But the editor called the next day. "It's raw," she said. "It's powerful. We're going to lead with it for our spring list." When the cover mock-up arrived, I sat down and stared at it for a long time. A soft silhouette of a woman holding a baby. No faces, just outlines and shadows. The title was simple. Filed First, One Mother's Fight for Herself. The book tour was modest. 3 cities, 1 live event in Austin, a handful of interviews, enough to spark conversation without overwhelming my quiet world. Maddie came with me. So did Ruth, sometimes. At one stop, a young man approached me after the signing line ended. He looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "My name's Aaron," he said. "I'm a single dad. My daughter's 2. I just wanted to say thank you. Reading your story made me feel like I could try again." I shook his hand, holding his gaze. "Then you already are." That night, I tucked Maddie into a hotel crib and wrote the first chapter of a new book. Fiction, this time. A story about a woman who rebuilds a house brick by brick after a hurricane. The parallels weren't subtle. One night, just before Maddie's first birthday, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address, handwritten, familiar slant. I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened it. It wasn't long, just 3 sentences. "I watched your interview, I read your book, I hope one day she can know me, even if she never forgives me." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. I folded the letter and placed it inside a small wooden box I kept in my closet. Inside it were all the things I hadn't thrown away. The ultrasound photos, the lavender paint swatch, the court summons, the first onesie I ever bought. And now, his letter. Because one day, when she was old enough to ask questions, I wanted to give her every answer I had. But until then, the story was still mine. Spring melted into summer, and just like that, Maddie was one. We threw her a birthday party in the backyard. Nothing extravagant. Just string lights, hand-cut bunting, a carrot cake shaped like a rabbit, and a tiny splash pool that turned our patchy grass into a swamp by the end of the day. Ruth came, naturally, with a camera slung around her neck and a cake she insisted tasted better than mine. It didn't. Marlene brought a box of mismatched baby books and cried when Maddie waddled across the lawn in her sundress. I didn't invite anyone from Ryder's side. Not because I was bitter, but because none of them had called. Not once. They had fallen as silent as he had. That was their choice. This was mine. Maddie beamed when we sang to her. Her hands were sticky with frosting and innocence. I held her up as she leaned toward the single candle and blew, her breath soft as silk. I'd whispered a wish too, one I couldn't speak aloud. Not yet. That night, after everyone left and the yard was full of deflated balloons and damp footprints, I sat on the porch with the baby monitor in hand. Maddie slept inside, curled on her side, arms flung above her head like she ruled the world. She did. And I was starting to believe I did too. The book did well, better than anyone expected. A second printing came 3 months after release. The publisher asked for a follow-up, a deeper dive on life after legal battles, co-parenting, and identity rebuilding. But I hesitated. Because the truth was, nothing dramatic had happened since the book came out. There were no new courtroom fires, no scandal, just the quiet labor of living. And I wasn't sure people wanted quiet. But Ruth reminded me they needed it. Everyone writes about the crash, she said. Few write about the cleanup. So I started again. A new manuscript. This time about the days no one documented. The routines, the therapy I didn't think I needed, the mistakes I still made. And the fact that even after everything, even with custody secure and the truth exposed, I still flinched when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Healing, it turned out, wasn't linear. It looped. It doubled back. Sometimes I woke at 2 a.m., heart racing, convinced Ryder was standing in the nursery. I'd jolt out of bed, only to find Maddie asleep and the night undisturbed. Other times, I'd watch old home videos, the few from when we were happy, and wonder if I was the deluded one all along. But more and more, those moments passed quickly, like shadows through branches. Not monsters. Just echoes. I started dating again, slowly, carefully, only after Maddie's bedtime. Only with people who understood that I was not a blank slate. They were meeting a woman shaped by fire. Most didn't last past the third date. One tried to tell me I should let go of the past over coffee. I didn't reply. I paid my bill and left him with the check and his ignorance. But then there was Luca. He was an ER nurse. We met at the community center where I'd taken Maddie for a first aid class. He helped me adjust the car seat straps after class, didn't push for my number, just smiled and said, "You're doing better than you think." I laughed. That's a low bar, considering I just installed the seat backward. The next week, I ran into him again at the library. Then again at the Saturday market. The fourth time, he asked if I liked Thai food. We took it slow. I told him the whole story up front. He didn't flinch. Just nodded and said, "Sounds like you fought through a war to build peace. I respect that." He met Maddie 3 months in. Not before. Not even a glimpse. And when he finally did, he brought a stuffed giraffe and sat on the floor with her while she clutched a teething ring and drooled on his sleeve. He didn't mind. He didn't run. And that terrified me. Because loving again meant risking again. And I wasn't sure I had anything left to lose. But Maddie giggled every time he lifted her in the air. And I started to believe maybe, not all at once, not like before, but maybe love could grow again. Like moss after wildfire. Quiet. Persistent. Around Maddie's 18th month, the publisher released the paperback version of the book. I did one last signing in Austin, a small indie bookstore, mostly locals. Halfway through the evening, I looked up and saw a woman standing quietly at the end of the line. She was in her 50s, lean and elegant, a scarf tied around her neck and worry in her eyes. When she reached me, she didn't hand over a book. She just whispered, "I'm Ryder's mother." The air left my lungs. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. Not since a Christmas dinner where she brought him an engraved flask and told me I looked tired in the face. "I didn't know," she said. "Not the truth. Not really. He lied to us too." I didn't know what to say. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "This isn't an apology," she said. "It's just the truth, in my own words, for you to keep or burn." Quote, I took the envelope. My fingers were shaking. She didn't stay, didn't ask for forgiveness, just nodded and walked out, her heels tapping quietly against the floor. I didn't open the letter that night, or the next. But on the third day, I sat on my porch and read it. It was simple, direct, and filled with regret. She admitted she hadn't believed me, hadn't wanted to, that it was easier to believe her son had been wronged than to face the truth of what he'd done. She ended with, "You were right to protect her. I hope one day she knows what it cost you." I didn't cry, but I folded the letter and added it to the box in my closet. It wasn't closure, but it was another piece. And piece by piece, the full picture was coming together. After I read her letter, I sat on the porch for a long time, just listening. The wind rustled through the crepe myrtles, carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle from down the street. Inside, Maddie was playing with her shape sorter, the rhythmic sound of plastic on wood tapping in a way that grounded me. The letter sat folded in my palm. I had imagined this moment 100 times. Ryder's family reaching out, some olive branch extended, but I'd always pictured bitterness, manipulation, a last-ditch effort to rewrite what had already been carved into the stone of my life. But this wasn't that. This was quiet, reflective, and it left me more unsettled than anger ever could. I slipped the letter into the box, next to Ryder's last note, and closed the lid gently. Maybe this was part of healing too, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Not forgetting, but allowing truth to expand beyond the borders I'd drawn around it. That night, Luca cooked dinner in my kitchen for the first time. Maddie sat in her booster chair, watching him sauté garlic with wide-eyed fascination. He moved easily, like he belonged there, but didn't assume he did. He asked me where things were. He rinsed every dish. He wiped down the counters. "Don't take this the wrong way," I said, "but you're almost unsettlingly competent." He grinned. "I work 12-hour shifts with drunk people and dislocated shoulders. Cooking for 2 girls is a vacation." We ate on the patio. Maddie gnawed on a piece of roasted carrot. Luca poured us each a glass of wine. "I read your book," he said. I paused. And I was already in awe of you. Now I'm in awe of you twice." I laughed softly, grateful for the ease between us. But later that night, when Maddie was asleep, and we sat side by side on the porch swing, I said the thing I hadn't dared to voice. "I'm scared you'll leave." His expression didn't change. He didn't rush to reassure me. He just reached for my hand and said, "Then I'll just have to keep proving I won't." And for once, I believed someone. Over the next few months, the rhythms of life shifted gently. Maddie learned new words, mama, baba, and no, which she used with terrifying confidence. She started daycare 2 days a week, a cozy little place run by a woman named Iris, who wore purple glasses and knitted tiny blankets for each child. It gave me time to write, to breathe, to remember who I was outside motherhood. The second book was slower to come, not because I lacked material, but because writing about stability was oddly harder than writing about chaos. People expect transformation arcs, not the slow maintenance of a rebuilt life. But that was what I had now: maintenance, recalibration, realignment. Luca stayed. He didn't move in, not yet, but he was present. Every Tuesday night, he brought takeout and stayed until Maddie's bedtime. Every other weekend, we went to the park. He never overstepped. He never presumed. And then, one Saturday afternoon, as we were packing up our picnic blanket, Maddie reached for him and said, "Dada." Time froze. Luca looked at me, alarmed. "I didn't," he started. "I know," I said, heart pounding. I knelt beside Maddie, brushing a curl from her forehead. "That's Luca," I said gently. "Remember? Can you say Luca?" She blinked, then clapped and said, "Luca!" It was an innocent mistake. She'd heard the word somewhere: books, daycare, the park, and Luca was the man who lifted her onto the swing and caught her when she wobbled. But it shook something in me, reminded me how fragile the scaffolding of our lives still was. That night, after Maddie was asleep, I brought it up. "I don't want to confuse her," I said. "You're not," Luca replied. "She's just figuring the world out. You'll guide her, and I'll follow your lead." I nodded, but I knew it was time to make a decision. About how I'd talk to her, about Ryder, about everything. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to hand her the weight of betrayal too young either. So I started small. At bedtime the next night, as she snuggled into my shoulder, I whispered, "You have a mommy who loves you, and a Luca who helps. And one day, I'll tell you about the rest." She fell asleep before I finished, but the words lingered. One afternoon in early October, I got a letter from the court. Not from Ryder. From the judge. A routine update regarding his visitation rights. The evaluations required of him had lapsed. He hadn't followed up. No new contact. The file would be closed unless further legal action was taken. I stared at the letter for a long time. So that was it. He was done. He had walked away again. But this time I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel fear. I felt relief. And then sadness. Because Maddie deserved a full father. A real one. Not just stories and letters in a box. That night, I opened the closet and took out the box. I sat on the floor, the lamp casting a soft circle of light, and began sorting. The letters. The ultrasound. The custody rulings. And finally, the photo, the only one I hadn't burned. Us, in the kitchen laughing, his hand on my stomach. I slipped it into a new envelope and wrote a note. For when she's ready, not before. Then I sealed it. And I knew, when the day came, I would hand it to her, not as a weapon, not as an explanation, but as a truth she deserved to hold. The first day Maddie asked me about her father, she was 2.5. We were sitting on a blanket under the pecan tree, reading picture books about families. One about a grandma raising her grandson, another about 2 dads, another about a foster parent. She pointed to the page. A cartoon boy held both his parents' hands. "Mama," she asked, "where's my other hand?" It took me a second to realize what she meant. I closed the book slowly. "Maddie," I said carefully, brushing a crumb from her chin, "some families look different. Some have 2 parents. Some have 1. Some have 4. Yours has one mama who loves you with her whole heart." She blinked, chewing on the corner of her sleeve. "Did I have a hand?" I paused, then nodded. "Yes, baby, you did." She looked at her own hands for a moment, then wrapped both around my wrist. "Now you have mine." And that was it. She didn't ask again, not then. But I knew it wouldn't be the last time. That night I wrote in my journal, the one I'd kept since she was born. I described her question, her hands, the way she had already developed this gentle, inquisitive way of noticing the world. I also wrote that I wasn't ready. But I was willing to try. Maddie started preschool that fall. She wore a backpack bigger than her torso and carried a crumpled paper flower for her teacher. She waved at me through the window, her nose pressed to the glass, her smile fogging the pain. I sat in the car for 5 minutes after drop-off, just breathing. Freedom, after being tethered for so long, felt unfamiliar. Not good or bad, just strange. I drove home, folded laundry, answered emails. Made myself a real breakfast. By noon, I missed her. By 3, I was at the gate, waiting. She emerged with paint on her cheeks and a cupcake clutched in one hand. "Did you cry?" I teased. "Nope," she said with pride. "Did you?" I kissed her head. "Maybe a little." That week, I submitted the final manuscript for the follow-up memoir, The Quiet After, What Comes Next. It was rawer, less polished than the first, but more honest, less about triumph, more about transition. It would come out in 6 months. Around that same time, Luca asked if I wanted to move in together. We were sitting on the floor of my living room, Maddie, between us building a block tower. He didn't make a speech, just said, "I think we make a good home. I'd like to make it together." I stared at him for a long time. "I want that too," I said, "but I need you to know I'll never forget what came before. It's in everything, even the good." "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to erase it. I just want to be part of what comes next." We waited another 3 months. Took our time. Merged closets slowly. Painted rooms together. Laughed through assembling IKEA furniture like it was a test of character. When he officially moved in, Maddie had already declared him family. She called him by name, but sometimes added her own flair, "My Luca." And the truth was, he was. Not a replacement. A chapter. Just after Maddie turned 4, a letter arrived. It was from Ryder. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. No texts, no legal filings, nothing. But there it was, a plain white envelope, no return address, just her name scrawled in unfamiliar, almost hesitant script. I sat with it for hours before opening it. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't manipulative. It was reflective. He wrote that he'd gone back to therapy, that he hadn't filed for more custody because he knew he hadn't earned it, that he'd been following her growth from afar, through public photos, through mentions in articles, that he hoped one day, when Maddie was old enough, she might want to know him, but if she didn't, he would respect it. He included a photo of him, alone, holding a book he'd read because it reminded him of me. He wrote, "I'm trying to learn who I was, and who I am, not to rewrite history, just to stop running from it." I didn't know what to feel. So I did what I always did. I folded the letter, added it to the box. But this time, I also took the box down from the shelf and placed it into a small chest, one Maddie wouldn't be able to open for many years. It was hers now, not mine. When she was ready. The night before the second book released, I stood on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching fireflies flicker in the tall grass. Maddie was asleep inside. Luca was grading EMT coursework at the dining table. The house was quiet, steady. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one curled up on the kitchen floor with a drained bank account and lavender paint chips in her pocket. She wouldn't recognize this life. But I think she'd be proud. Not because everything was perfect, but because I didn't let the wreckage define me. Because I turned the silence he left into a voice. Because I built something true. The final lines of my new book echoed in my mind. What came after wasn't victory. It was roots. It was laughter at bath time. It was someone to hold your hand without asking what you'd survived. It was her. It was me. It was enough. I whispered those words into the wind. Then I turned off the porch light and walked back inside. The morning after my second book released, I woke to find a note on the kitchen counter beside a steaming cup of coffee and a vase of sunflowers. Luca's handwriting was careful, his letters rounded, a quiet echo of who he was at his core. To my favorite writer, your words changed people, but your life changed me. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. LOL. I ran my finger over the ink, feeling its weight in my chest. Maddie was still snoring softly in her bed. The house was hushed, a rare and precious kind of silence. I let it hold me. For once, silence meant peace, not absence. The publisher had booked a handful of launch events, most of them small libraries, universities, a virtual roundtable with other women writing memoirs from the bones of their hardest seasons. But one was big, a feature panel at a national book festival in D.C. I almost said no. The thought of standing on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers, answering questions about pain and identity and motherhood, made my throat close. But Ruth said, "You owe it to yourself, not to be brave, just to be seen." So I packed our bags. Luca took time off. Maddie brought 2 stuffed animals and a glittery purple travel pillow that shed sparkles on every surface. We flew together, the 3 of us. On the plane, Maddie curled up in my lap mid-flight, whispering, "Mama, this cloud feels like bedtime." I smiled and held her tighter. The panel was at a historic theater, all red velvet and gold trim. The green room buzzed with nervous laughter and the rustling of pages. I met 2 of the other speakers, one a poet who'd escaped a cult, another a journalist turned activist who'd been through 3 foster homes before she turned 16. Every one of us wore the same look, not fear, but reverence. We knew what it meant to tell the truth and survive its consequences. When it was my turn, I stepped onto the stage with Maddie's tiny necklace in my pocket, her first birthday gift to me, a painted macaroni heart strung on thread. The crowd was silent as I read a passage about the first court hearing. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. Afterward, during the Quand A, a man stood up in the back, middle-aged, neatly dressed. He cleared his throat and said, "What would you say to someone who was the person your ex was? Not him, exactly, but someone who hurt someone, who wants to be better, but doesn't know if they deserve to be." The question sat in the air like smoke. I paused, then said, "I think becoming better doesn't mean you get to rewrite the story. It means you accept your role in it and still choose to grow. Redemption isn't earned through someone else's forgiveness. It's built when no one is watching." He nodded slowly, then sat down. I never learned his name, but I hoped he heard what he needed. Back at the hotel, Maddie was snuggled in bed with Luca reading The Gruffalo for the 5th time. I kissed her forehead, whispered goodnight, then joined Luca on the balcony. "You were incredible," he said. "I didn't throw up," I replied. He laughed and handed me a glass of water. "You made people feel. That's rare." I leaned on the railing, watching the city lights shimmer like a pulse. Sometimes I wonder if I'm too much inside this story still, if I'm turning my life into a series of chapters instead of just living. Quote, "You are living. You just have a better memory than most." And I thought about that, let it settle. He reached for my hand. "I've been thinking," he said, "about something more permanent." I turned. "Not a proposal," he said quickly. "Not yet, but maybe a place, ours, a house, with a backyard big enough for her to run in. Maybe a dog." I blinked. "You want to buy a house together?" "Or build one," he said. "I found some land, not far. Good schools, room to grow." My heart did something strange and quiet. Not a flutter, not a skip, a settling. "Yes," I said, "let's look." We found the land in November, a sloped acre just outside town, bordered by wildflowers and cedar. Maddie called it her Castle Hill. We designed the house together, simple, light-filled, with a wraparound porch and a study where I could write. Maddie insisted on a window seat for stories, and Luca drew it into the plans himself. The process was slow, framing, permits, unexpected costs. But we didn't rush. It felt good to build something from the ground up. No ghosts in the walls, no memories in the floorboards. Just future. When the foundation was poured, we let Maddie press her handprints into the concrete. I wrote the date beside them. Luca added a small stone heart. "This will be here forever," Maddie said, eyes wide. "So will we," I replied. One evening, as the house neared completion, I got a message from an unfamiliar email. The subject line read, "For Maddie when you're ready." My hands trembled. It was from Ryder. Just a short message. He'd moved out of state, started a job as a youth counselor at a community center, still in therapy, still not filing for contact. Attached was a letter, addressed to her, sealed in a PDF. He wrote, "I know you'll decide if and when to share it. No pressure. Just a piece of her story, from me." I downloaded it, read it once, then printed it, and added it to the chest. Because it wasn't mine. It was hers. The day we moved into the new house, Maddie ran barefoot through the halls, her voice echoing like music. She chose her room by the window with the biggest sunrise. She arranged her books in a line on the window seat and whispered, "Now we have our forever place." I smiled. Because it wasn't just a home. It was the life I'd fought for. Brick by brick. Our forever place settled into itself like it had been waiting for us all along. Every room echoed with new beginnings. The tick of the grandfather clock I'd inherited from my mother, the hum of Luca's coffee grinder at sunrise, Maddie's footsteps racing down the hall, tiny and fast and always barefoot. The days grew full and slow all at once. We built routines without realizing it. Saturday pancakes, Wednesday library trips, Sunday morning dance parties in the kitchen. I'd catch glimpses of us reflected in the glass. Me holding a bowl of batter, Maddie twirling in her mismatched socks, Luca in his worn gray hoodie pretending to moonwalk. And I'd think, this is it. This is what safety looks like. Not perfect, not free of shadows, but whole. My office overlooked the backyard. I arranged it simply. A large desk, a wall of books, and the bulletin board where Maddie pinned every drawing she wanted me to put in the next story. Sometimes, I'd glance at the bookshelf and see my own name on the spines. 2 memoirs, translated now into 4 languages. That still felt strange. Not pride, exactly. More like awe. People sent letters. A woman from the Netherlands who'd left an abusive partner and read my first book while staying in a shelter. A man in Oregon who raised his niece after her mother abandoned her and wrote, "Your story made me feel less alone." I responded to each one, slowly, thoughtfully, because their stories were sacred too. Maddie started kindergarten the following fall. She picked out her own backpack, covered in stars, and a lunchbox that said, "Kindness is cool." She kissed my cheek at drop-off and waved bravely before disappearing into the sea of backpacks and bright sneakers. I sat in the car afterward, staring at the playground for a while. Then I whispered, "She's ready." But was I? That fall, Luca's parents visited from Vermont. It was the first time I'd met them. Maddie made them a glitter-glued welcome sign that said, "Hi, Grandma Dee and Grandpa Paul, we got snacks." They adored her. And they were gentle with me. Not overly familiar, not invasive, just curious, respectful, kind. Over dinner one night, Dee leaned in and said, "Luca told us you've walked through fire. You don't look burned, you look like someone who built a fireplace." I smiled. I didn't do it alone. Paul raised his glass. To strong women and the men smart enough to follow their lead. We clinked. That night, after they'd gone to bed, Luca and I stood in the kitchen washing dishes. "I think they love you," he said. "I think they love Maddie." He dried a plate, then paused. "What would you say if I said I wanted to make this official? Not just a mortgage, a marriage." I set the sponge down slowly. "I'd say, ask me again when Maddie's asleep." He did. On the porch, under the stars. No big production. Just him, on one knee, a ring I hadn't seen coming, and a smile that didn't ask for anything I wasn't ready to give. I said yes. Not just to him. To us. To a chapter I hadn't known I was allowed to write. The wedding was small. Backyard. String lights. Barefoot flower girl with glitter on her cheeks. Ruth officiated. Marlene cried. Maddie dropped the ring pillow halfway down the aisle and shouted, "Wait, I forgot my petals!" We laughed our way through the vows. "I promise," Luca said, "to always refill the coffee grinder and to be here every day, even the messy ones." I said I promise to believe in us, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, and to remember that love is not rescue, it's choosing to stay. When we kissed, Maddie clapped and shouted, "Now we can eat cake!" And we did. Under the same tree where she'd asked me about the other hand. The seasons spun. Maddie grew taller, faster, braver. She joined a school reading club and insisted I read every book she brought home, twice. She asked more questions now. About everything. Where stars went in the morning. Why some kids didn't have two parents. Why the neighbor's dog barked only at mailmen. And then, one evening, she asked again, "Mama, why don't I have a dad like Olivia's?" I was folding laundry. The quiet hit like a drum. I sat on the floor. "You have a Luca," I said gently, "but I think you're asking about something else." She nodded. "Was he mean?" I hesitated. Then said, "He made choices that hurt people, and then he left. But he did one thing right. He gave me you." She crawled into my lap. "Do I have pictures?" I exhaled slowly. "I have a box. With pieces of your story. When you're ready, we'll open it together." She didn't ask that night. Or the next. But I knew the day was coming. And I would be ready. Maddie was 8 the day we opened the box. It was a rainy afternoon. The kind where you cancel plans and drink hot chocolate and dig through memory bins. She pointed to it herself. "What's this one?" I paused. "It's your box. Letters, photos, things from before you were born." She stared at it, wide-eyed. "Can I see?" I nodded. We sat on the rug. I let her pick each item, one by one. A photo of me pregnant, a onesie, the ultrasound printout. Then the first letter. I read it aloud, skipping parts too heavy for her yet. She listened, quiet, still. Then, softly, "Does he still think about me?" I swallowed. "Yes. I think he does." She looked up. "Do I have to meet him?" "No," I said. "Only if you want to. One day. Or never. That choice is yours." She leaned against me. "I like our family just like this." And I whispered, "Me too." Spring came again. Maddie was 9, all long limbs and wild curls and book smudges on her sleeves. She still loved macaroni necklaces, still couldn't eat a sandwich without deconstructing it first, still asked the kinds of questions that stopped you in your tracks. Luca and I had been married for 3 years. The house had settled into its creaks, like it finally trusted us. We added a swing under the pecan tree, a hammock by the fence. Maddie painted a mural on the garage wall with stars and rainbows, and a lopsided cat she swore looked exactly like Ruth's. I wrote a 3rd book, a novel this time, fiction but rooted in truth. A woman raising a child alone, building something sacred from rubble. The publisher called it lyrical and fierce. I called it Maddie's bedtime story for grown-ups. It released on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I was back in the carpool line, half a granola bar in my hand, signing permission slips on my steering wheel. Fame had never been the point. Truth had. And Maddie was old enough now to understand the difference. One morning, she padded into the kitchen while I was grinding coffee. "Mama," she said, "can we send a letter?" I turned. "To who?" She pulled the PDF letter Ryder had sent years ago from the drawer where I'd filed it. "To him. Just one. Just to tell him I'm okay." My heart stilled. I knelt. "You can, and I'll help you, but only if you really want to." She nodded. "I don't need him to write back. I just want him to know I'm not mad." So we wrote. She chose the paper. Lined notebook stock with a doodle in the corner. She dictated. I transcribed. "Hi, I'm Maddie. I live in a house with a tree and a swing. I like stories, and animals, and cake. I know you're my other hand. Mama told me. I think you did your best, even if it wasn't a lot. I'm not mad. I hope you're nice to other people now. Bye." She signed it with a heart. We mailed it to the address he'd given all those years ago. No expectation, just release. She skipped all the way home. Months passed. Maddie grew into her voice. She joined student council. Wrote an essay about kindness that made her teacher cry. She still asked about him sometimes, but gently now. Less curiosity, more context. And then, one day, a letter came back. She was 10. It was addressed to her, in that same tentative script. She opened it with careful hands. He didn't say much, just that he was grateful, that her words were kinder than he deserved, that he was proud of her, that he would always be quietly cheering from afar. Maddie smiled when she read it. "I think that's enough," she said. "He can be a quiet chapter." And she tucked the letter into her own keepsake box. Her version of mine. Time moved. We built a life stitched together with intention. We celebrated small wins, lost teeth, school awards, the time Maddie beat Luca at chess and demanded a trophy made out of popsicle sticks. I spoke less at panels now, wrote slower, said no more often, and one day Ruth retired. She threw herself a farewell party and made everyone wear fake press badges with ridiculous headlines like, "Former editor now Queen of Croquet." She hugged me hard that night. "You turned the ashes into ink," she said. "You never needed a newsroom to write truth." I cried in the parking lot. Maddie was 12 when she asked if I'd ever felt like the storm. Not the survivor, the cause. We were baking, or trying to. There was flour on her glasses. "Sometimes," I said, "but then I remember, storms don't choose their path, people do." She thought about that. "So you're not a storm, you're the roof." I laughed. "The what?" "The roof. You keep everything dry, even when it rains." I'd never loved a metaphor more. Luca and I celebrated our 5th anniversary with dinner on the porch and a playlist of every song we'd ever slow danced to. He gave me a ring reset with Maddie's birthstone added. I gave him a leather-bound copy of our wedding vows, annotated with all the inside jokes we'd added over the years. We danced under the stars while Maddie took photos from the kitchen window. That night, she crept into our room just before bed. "I'm glad you found each other," she said. "It makes the beginning feel like a story instead of a bruise." She's 13 now. Taller than me, smarter than I ever was at that age, fierce, thoughtful, with a bookshelf full of novels and a sense of justice that scares me in the best way. She started writing too. First poems, then short stories, then a piece titled The Woman Who Raised Me, which she entered into a youth writing contest. It won. They asked if they could publish it. She said yes. And when it appeared online, she sat me down and said, "Now it's your turn to be in the box." I asked what she meant. She opened her keepsake chest and tucked the printed copy beside writer's letter. "Everyone gets a chapter," she said, "but you're the cover." I sometimes think about who I was the day he left. The girl holding a folded bank receipt in one hand and a ruined dream in the other. She was strong. But this version of me, the one who raised a daughter on love and grit and midnight stories, she's something else entirely. She's free. And she's no longer afraid of silence. Because she filled it. With a life. With a girl. With a family. And with the kind of love that stays. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.